Welcome to the Popish Plot. I'm Nate.
I'm Jessica.
And I'm Mike.
Today we're here with a fun little thing that I don't think we've done in a while.
I think we've only done a couple movie reviews at all.
We are, as Jess just pointed out, reviewing a movie.
Now, we often mention films, but not to examine them as films, just to dissect their theological shortcomings.
And in fairness, it's what we're good at, so we're probably going to do a little bit of that here. But the movie that we are going to be reviewing is the new release from Mark Wahlberg and
you have a hard time not saying Marky Mark too, don't you?
Yes, I have a hard time not calling him Marky Mark.
I like to imagine all the other priests that were in the seminary with Father Stu as the funky bunch in my mind.
Yes.
But the new movie
Or
from
maybe we call the producers the funky bunch.
from producer Mark Wahlberg, Father Stu.
Based loosely on the life of a real life priest who lived in America.
Yes.
Inspired by?
Yeah, I think that's better.
I think that's a better term.
Inspired by / based on the life of Father Stuart Long, a priest of the diocese or archdiocese of Helena, Montana.
Yes. And you know, it's one of those problems that you have where they wanted to make both a entertaining film and at the same time make a film that had, you know, that had a reasonably clear message.
Yeah.
And I personally think they did a pretty good job with it, in that most movies I've seen that try to have a message, and be entertaining, they tend to generally fall to one side of the fence or the other. They can be really entertaining, or they can really have a message, but they don't really tread that line in between.
Sure.
Not to say that this movie does not have its faults or things that it could have worked on and gotten done a little bit better.
But in the basic story is there's Stu. Stu is not the kind of guy you'd think would become a priest.
Stu is not the kind of guy you want to model your life after.
But
I mean, at one point in the movie, he punches a statue of Jesus.
Which is hilarious.
It was hilarious.
It was.
I'm surprised he didn't hurt himself more, given that Stu was also a semi-professional boxer.
So he knows how to punch.
So he knows how to throw a punch.
Which, of course, when you're punching a statue is worse for you. Like, I don't know how to punch, so I wouldn't hurt myself that bad.
He knows how to punch, and at the time, he was drunk. So as far as holding back, well, he's probably doing less of that.
Yep.
Anyway, so the main point of the movie that actually covers the main point of his life is he grew up in a not particularly religious family. His family wasn't religious, and then his brother died, causing the family to essentially be mad at God. When you read about the real life Father Stu, he actually went to Catholic school for some years, even though he wasn't Catholic. So he had
common.
more background than stuff. And so he spent his life working at various things. They start when he was a boxer, which was, and as I pointed out in the story, he's at the age where people retire from boxing, which is pretty young. So
he's in his he was in his 30s. He was in his 30s, and he was still looking to make his big break, which means that he hadn't gotten where he needed to be before he reached the point in time in his life where most people, if they had been doing that all their life, would be saying, okay, I'm done now.
Yep.
And in real life, he also played football in college. And so he was doing a lot of rough and tumble sports. You get concussions. Your body just can't take it for so long.
Yeah.
So in the movie, he decides he's moving to Hollywood to become a star. In real life, his mom actually said, yeah, that seems like a good idea. You should do that.
Sure, go ahead. Knock yourself out.
Yeah.
At which point, he, tries becoming a movie star. And we all know the issues of trying to become a movie star, especially when you're a 30-something guy who was a boxer, so you do not play the pretty boy parts.
and while Mark Wahlberg looks like he, even when he's looking a little rough, looks like he could be a movie star.
Nate, if it's easier for you, it's totally fine to call him Marky Mark. If that just flows off the tongue, we'll go with it.
No, I'm gonna go with his proper name.
Okay. With his SAG name.
Even when he was looking a little rough in that movie, he still looked like he could theoretically be, a movie star.
Yeah.
Based on the pictures I saw of Father Stu when he was around that age.
He was an average guy.
He was an average guy. He wasn't bad looking, but he wasn't, oh my goodness, I need you for my film.
Yes.
Yes. And then in the movie, he decides that he likes this girl in movie ways of that she showed up one time and rebuffed his advances, and so now I have to go move my life around to get her.
She made him have to work for it.
Well, in fairness, he didn't have much of a life at that point.
Yes. Yes, in real life, there was someone who is not being named due to the storyline that was part of his life, and as in the movie, she was religious, and she's like, you've got to be baptized before I will date you. In real life, it was her family at least was somewhat religious, and she's like, you got to be baptized before we can get married, to get a church wedding.
Well, again, this is not a documentary.
Yeah.
No.
This is a fictionalized version of the story, so there are deviations, there are simplifications. But the core of the story is someone who is very far from God responds to the grace of conversion, genuinely changes their life, and then everything works out perfectly because everybody knows that once you follow Jesus, you don't have any problems.
Yeah,
whoa, wait a minute.
That's
hold on.
not the film or real life.
You had me going with the up to the point at which it was genuinely responds to God's call.
So both in the movie and in real life, Stu responds to God's call. He changes his life.
Yes, although in the movie it was very much starting out, I'm trying to get the girl. Yep. As time went on, he actually had a genuine conversion experience and was, trying his best in various ways to conform his life to a Christian life.
And then one day has an experience which gave him a call, as the title of the movie would suggest, to a higher calling of being a Catholic priest.
Yes, and for this I have to say I loved the theater we were in. We had people of all sorts of adult ages. I'm not counting the couple that decided to pick that as a make-out film because I'm like, why in the world would you pick a religious film to make out in the corner? But still, there was, upper teens to, senior citizens there.
A good cross-section.
Various ethnic origins that were obvious. And clearly not all of them were just Catholics to see it because they were Catholic. Because at the end of the film, someone actually said out loud to their friends, I thought he was going to get the girl. It's like, this is a film about a guy becoming a priest.
Well, maybe they thought the other meaning of Father Stu.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm like, I just heard that, right?
But, so, this extremely physical man, he's been a boxer, he's been a football player, he was a bouncer. He suddenly discovers a degenerative muscle disease for which there is no cure.
Yes.
I did really like the scene. Sorry, I should stop fidgeting.
It's just a loud fidget.
I did really like the scene, though, where both he and his mother suggested that because they haven't seen it in anyone this young before, that means he might have a better chance of surviving it.
Sure.
Yes, I believe the disease was shortened to IBM, and it's much like Lou Gehrig's disease, and that it's a progressive, muscle
it's a progressive degenerative muscle issue, and once it gets rolling, it really does. It doesn't go gently, and it doesn't slow down. It's like a freight train.
Yeah, and Stu could do what he'd done before, which was simply be mad about the situation.
And punch Jesus statues.
Punch statues of Jesus, and generally frustrate his own life. Or he can accept what's happening and embrace all the challenge that God has given him. What I really liked about Father Stu, it's not a perfect film, but what I really liked about it was I've never seen a more genuine portrait of religious conversion.
Yes.
Often in movies about religious figures, they're good. They're faced with some temptation not to be good, and ultimately they decide to stay good. Or there's somebody who's bad, and then
have no real reason to not continue being bad until all of a sudden they decide that they don't want to be anymore.
Yeah, and then everything is just fine because now they're good.
Yes.
No, this shows the real struggle that anyone who's genuinely trying to follow Jesus has in accepting the grace he's giving and conforming one's life to Christ. In Father Stu's case, in really carrying quite a heavy cross.
Yes. Well, and even before he realized he was carrying that cross, they did a really good job of showing it. And that most of the people in Stu's life did not see, at least according to the movie, did not see this as being a viable option.
You a priest?
Yeah. You know, when in the movie he tells his mother in the movie, and it's not a spoiler because you can see it in the trailer, but he tells his mom he's going to be a priest, and she says, "For Halloween?"
Yeah. Just here we have Peter. Peter was a fisherman. He was a fisherman who his mouth tended to outpace his mind. And yet, he then delivers all the great sermons that we hear throughout Easter, as related to us in the Acts of the Apostles.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and as far as I can remember, none of his sermons were so long and boring that someone fell asleep and died.
He killed no one. There were mass conversions as a result of Peter's sermons. They were very effective.
As I do like that
Paul
story about Paul.
Paul killed a guy. He was such a boring preacher, he once killed a guy.
I mean, I think it was more
With
than
his,
last
with
forever.
his
But...
words.
Listen, brevity is the soul of wit.
But one of the thing I really liked about this is, number one, while it is a definitively religious movie, it's not like other religious movies in that you didn't have to be religious or want to be religious to really feel comfortable in there watching the movie.
There is no Kirk Cameron in this film.
Exactly.
I mean, there is someone that I find the annoyingly schismatic, equivalent. However,
Sure.
he played a mean-spirited, drunk bigot, so it was one of those, well, he's not really acting, so it's not the same.
But I've watched a lot of films that were intended to be religious films.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's too religious.
And they're too religious. They're first off, their goal is either to preach to the choir.
Although I do like at the end of credits, like one of the production companies or something was literally preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Like at the very end,
Yeah.
I'm like,
Hey, as someone who's sung in the choir, those people need to be preached to too.
But I'm just saying, a lot of them are either preaching to the choir, or they are pretending as they are acting as though they are attempting to convert the masses.
Yeah.
And the religiosity of it is very much hitting you over the head.
Well, and there's a sense of there's a somewhat artificial piety.
Yeah.
Whereas Father Stu, the film, is very earthy.
Yeah.
yes, I get some people not liking the fact that it's largely just for language. Like,
but that's realistic.
There is a sex scene, but it's like a kiss, and if they did the train going through the tunnel, it'd be more explicit than what it shows.
It's less than Hitchcock.
You know what happened, but it shows nothing.
Well, and
I assume also, all
It
of
does
this punching
suggest
is blood, but
it does suggest it does explicitly suggest afterwards that what you think happened
did
happened.
happen.
Well,
but-
and what's great is very rare. We all know that sin is bad for us, but often to be cool, to reach out to people, we kind of downplay that. There's a great scene in the confessional in Father Stu where he says,
I love every single confessional.
yes, the confession
scene.
scenes are
The
great.
confession scenes are great.
But he says, I got exactly what I wanted. I got what I've been wanting for months, and I don't want it. And I didn't enjoy it. And now I feel terrible about betraying God. That's beautiful, man.
That is a fantastic conversion moment there.
Yep.
Because up until
Who among us hasn't that actually happened to? I've done the same sin that I used to do, but all of a sudden it's not as satisfying as it was.
and up until the moment before it happened, his entire motivation was, this is what I'm going after.
Yep.
And the moment it's about to happen, he in that moment suddenly starts saying, no, this isn't what we,
And after it happened, he regrets it.
he regretted it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I just love the
beautiful.
confession scenes
Yes.
because in movies, if you get a confession scene, it's largely like some old, we're pretending that Vatican II never happened, very dark thing with mobsters. It's always mobsters. There's never any confession scenes in any movie that doesn't have mobsters.
I'm telling you, if you listen to Hollywood,
No,
Yeah.
I didn't care for the fact that they used the old confessional booths, because once again, I've never been. I've been told that there are churches I could go to where I could get that experience, but that's never been my experience.
And all the churches I've ever been to.
But it's such a great look.
Oh no, it is, and I love the fact that he's sitting on the one side of the screen, and he's like, "Do you know who I am?" And the priest is just like, "I have a general idea."
It's like very few people swear in the confessional. They might confess using, not polite language, but they don't actually usually say that.
Or again, if a lot of people, I presume, because I don't know, I've only ever experienced mine, confession may be, like some of the other films we've discussed, overly pious. Whereas Stu's just saying, this is what I've done. Here I am. In all of my...
Warts and all.
Wow. So, what I found most fascinating of all is that the writer and director, Rosalind Ross, is not a Catholic.
Yes.
And yet made this deeply Catholic film. Not perfect.
No. There are some moments where...
There are a number of times when he says something that, it's gnostic.
Yeah.
Or it's like a 50-50. It's like you were right up until that moment.
Close to being, and then you just slid past the point of being right.
Yep.
and there were
but
also...
it's very inspiring sounding Gnosticism.
There were a couple... I don't know. I mean, there was... I didn't really have any complaints about any of the flow. It flowed really, really well. There weren't any scenes that were really unnecessary. There were a couple that... You had to watch the scene all the way through to really get it. Like, there's the scene where he's picturing himself walking along next to the one guy in seminary, and up until like you get to the end of that scene where you realize that
this was a dream sequence.
This was sort of like a daydream sequence, because I looked at it and you saw them, and then you see them walking together, and then you see them, and you see them walking together. And I'm like, is this multiple days? Are we watching multiple days go by?
Yes, that was one of my major criticisms of it, is after he's no longer a kid, it's kind of unmoored about when these things happened. Because they're trying to show, for the most part, like decades of time, and you would think it's only a couple years, and you only think it's a few years if you're Catholic, and it takes 5 years to become a priest.
At least.
I mean, he took 10 in real life. Because,
it takes a whole year in most cases to go through the RCIA process. But his was, no, I'm going to get baptized, and then the next scene was, or a couple of scenes later, it's him getting baptized.
Well, but for movie time, there was plenty of going to classes, being assigned penances.
Yes.
Yeah, there was, and there was some that showed that time happened for, when he was studying to be a priest. But it's one of those things where it's like, all right, it seems like day one, they're allowed to wear Roman collars and preach. There's no point in time in which anyone is a transitional deacon in the storyline.
No, but all the students in major seminary wear clerics for all 4 years. It's to get them used to it. So they do dress like priests.
All right, I'd only known ones where it was like, I've hit the point where I'm allowed to, dress in clerics.
Yeah, no, for all of theology. So for those 4 years, they'll go out.
Yes,
the pre-seminary or the pre-theology, they're regular students.
Yes,
but so they have the very awkward situation where they're going out to do apostolic work, and people are like, "Father," like, "I'm not a father yet."
Yes. But anyway, it's this weird thing because you'll be looking at a vehicle, and the vehicle's like from the 2000s, and it's supposed to be an old, broken down vehicle. And meanwhile, at the house, which it's supposed to be old and run down, but it's like the Harvest Gold fridge, the black and white television that has the big tubes, and it's like, what year is this?
But we also have to remember that most of this is taking place in relatively rural Montana, which I assume is like Canada, in that it's between 10 and 15 years behind folks on the coasts.
But like when he's visiting, when he goes to see his dad in his trailer, his dad's sitting there watching. It looked like a Bob Hope television show. It was a younger Bob Hope, so I can't be sure.
But it was clearly watching reruns, not watching a new show. But yes.
But just it was in black in this tiny little black and white TV. And,
And like the hotel he's at, which although it's going to be a cheap hotel, but they're going to have remodeled in the last 40 years.
Nope.
you see his dad with a cell phone, and it's
the
circa 1994. Big brick of a flip phone.
But at least it wasn't the VHS tape.
Yes.
Of the late 80s.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where most of the characters are, either dressed in like clerics where they don't really change that quickly, or that clothes that you're like, it's supposed to be timeless clothes, but if you actually know clothes, you know what general time it's actually in. So I'm like, when are we in his life? Clearly he was a little kid in the 70s, and I looked it up, he was actually born in 63, and if this is sometime later.
But anyways, getting back to our review.
The only part of the film that really surprised me was the ending to me seemed very abrupt. I just thought there'd be longer time of his ministry. Now, much of the actual Father Stu's ministry was spent in a long-term care facility, where he'd minister from his room because his mobility was extremely limited.
Yes, and I looked it up, and he was alive for about 7 years as a priest.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I totally get that they shortened it, but it went, like, I've been diagnosed with this thing, and then, boom, I have like a year to live.
But yeah, and you see him getting ordained, and then the next time you see him, his father's dropping him off at the long-term care facility, which I also thought was kind of weird, and that the father, like, dropped him off and just sort of... It's like, walk the guy in, man.
No, he had a powered wheelchair.
And walk in with him. I mean,
and it's one of those things, like my
if I was going into a place like that, and my dad, stopped in front of it and helped me get into the wheelchair, and then just sort of got back into the truck and watched me through the door, I'd be like, what is it?
and it's one of those things, in the movie it seemed like he was, like, essentially the emergency ordained that you're going to die so you can, not follow the rules. Because again, he was never made a deacon. The diocese is going to go and decide if we're going to make you a priest or not before making you a deacon.
Well, we've done that with many popes.
Yes. I'm not... There is a large amount of church law that has an asterisk for if someone's going to die, you can not do the normal rules.
But things weren't quite as condensed as the movie depicts them as being.
Yes.
Yeah,
sure. So, all in all, though,
I enjoyed it.
Very encouraged, because here's a very identifiable character. You can see a lot of yourself in him.
Yeah,
played by the very charismatic Marky Mark.
Well, and I would say this. I think that if we as a people could have more religious movies that were like this one, we would see more people being brought to the faith by religious movies. If only being brought closer to the faith, because of the fact that Father Stu was a very relatable individual, and in the experiences that were depicted that led him to convert and change his course of life, you could see why he might go and make those choices. It wasn't, well, I'm doing this because I believe in God now and I have to, and that's just the way that this works, right?
No, it's great to struggle.
Yes.
You saw him, having real human reasons for making choices that he made, and at the same time struggling with it and choosing to persevere.
Yep.
Yes, it looked like a film that happened to be Christian and not a Christian film.
Yes.
Which anyone who has seen a Christian film knows what that means.
Oh, one day we should totally review God's Not Dead.
What are they on now? 50 million?
Do we have to?
No.
I like how Hercules is mad at Zeus, and that's why he's an atheist. At least that's what happened in my mind. It makes the story 10 times better.
So, if you've seen Father Stu, comment below with your own thoughts. If you've not seen Father Stu, comment below with your general impression of religious motion pictures.
Yes.
Give this episode a like, subscribe to our channel, ring the bell to be notified the next time we upload a brilliant plot, because they're all brilliant.
They are.
I mean, sometimes we just phone them in.
No, he said it. He said it, therefore it's true. They are all brilliant. Every single one of them, 100% brilliant.
And one day we will publish Don't Be a Horrible Heretic.
One day we will publish Don't Be a Horrible Heretic.
All right.
Until then.
But until then, remember to live your faith.
Love your faith.
And share that love.
Can we have a whole section on Mel Gibson and his schismatic church that's, hates the Pope, but it's totally cool with all the stuff he does that gets him in the news when he's not acting?
How's your mother?
Oh, I do love Mark Wahlberg talks to animals from SNL.
I wish I had gone to the Wahlburgers here in Flint before it closed.
Oh, did it close?
Yeah. I think they now have like a food truck, but yeah, the actual mortar building is gone. Ham as the Funky Bunch.